My name is Kristen Nichols, and this is my Module 9 case study. The first section is all about summarizing the case study. The case study begins by introducing first-year assistant principal Richard Inman at Rocket Junior High. He is described as coming from the south side of town where James, a 15-year-old leader of the group of students Richard Inman is working to develop relationships with, is from as well. The setting is the morning at the bus drop-off area in the courtyard. Then, a little later in the day, Richard had to call James to the office regarding a third tardy for the week. James was stopped by his fifth-hour teacher, who explained she saw James make an exchange with another student. The teacher believes it is drugs. David Ramos is the other student, who is stated as a scholar, quite nervous, and plays in the band. Richard could only recall one discourse with David, and it was a congratulatory remark after the Christmas band concert. So what now? So Richard decided to have both boys and the officer into the office to ask what had happened. James admitted he gave David something to hold for him, and David showed signs of nervousness when asked his opinion. The officer responded by searching David and found a pair of brass knuckles. Brass knuckles are a prohibited weapon, and the possession of which constituted a felony offense. David was handcuffed by the officer as soon as the knuckles were found. James responded by saying he threatened David if he didn't hold them, and admitted he planned to use them after school on someone else. The officer responded by explaining he had to take both students to jail and charge them with felony possession of a prohibited weapon on school property. Also, both students would have to be expelled no less than 45 days into the disciplinary alternative education program because of a zero-tolerance board policy. Well, that made Richard pretty upset, as you can imagine. And then kind of what happened next was Richard started to realize if he did not bring the officer into the meeting, none of it would have been happening. Or at least that's what he thought. So Richard felt David was bullied and should not be punished for being afraid to stand up to James. They were taken. So then both of the students were taken to the youth detention center, and Richard called both mothers, who gave polar opposite reactions. James' mother wanted him to stay and suffer, while David's mother hung up and was there as soon as possible. Richard explained what happened to David's mother and did not have an answer for her, and felt as if he did not protect David. So now Richard is left with the paperwork that he has to do. What's he going to do? Well, Richard filled out the paperwork for James and refused to fill out paperwork for David to go to the DAEP. Richard understood it was a violation of policy to not fill out the forms for David, and he tore them up anyway. 1 week later, David was back in class and James was at the DAEP. Richard got notified by the director of secondary education that he had to fill out the paperwork for David. He told Richard he understood where he was coming from, but he had to follow policy, and if not, his personnel file would be affected with an official reprimand. Now, let's kind of start getting and digging into this. So let's look at the legal and ethical issues. First, I want to look at the ethical issues. These popped out to me most as I read through this case study. These are the four main ethical areas that I saw, or that I read. Richard felt the system was broken because David was bullied into holding the brass knuckles. So bullying. Richard Inman has developed a relationship with James through after-school basketball. So he already has this relationship with James. He doesn't even know David. So maybe there's some ethical things there. Richard thought the officer would not take David in handcuffs because of James' confession. So again, he felt like, he has this relationship with James, and he felt James confessing was this positive thing, but then, oh my gosh, they both have to go to jail or are arrested and taken to the corrections facility. And then Richard chose to only fill out paperwork on James. To me, that was an ethical decision on his part to only do one student. Then you look at the legal side. Brass knuckles are a prohibited weapon and possession constitutes a felony offense. We know that. It states that that's a legal policy. Zero tolerance board policy, expelled for no less than 45 days and go to the DAEP. We know that as well. Richard tearing up the paperwork for David and refusing to fill it out was against policy. We were told that as well. There are a lot of things that throughout this case study, it was kind of hard to know if it was ethic or legal or just opinions. So, the fourth legal matter that I picked up on was Director of Secondary Education told Richard to fill out the paperwork on David, or he would have to write him up in his personnel file for not following policy. Here is my sentence summary of the case study. First year assistant principal Richard Inman is balancing ethics and legal decision making concerning two very different boys, James and David, who acted against a stated legal policy, but there was so much more to the story. Okay, so section 4 is all about synthesizing the facts. So I'm going to talk about people first. These are known things that we know, known facts about the people involved in this case study. Richard understands and cares for the South Side. James has experience of getting in trouble and bullying. His mom does not support him anymore. David has never been in trouble, and his mom became emotional because of the situation. The officer followed the law and policy. James confessing was a big deal for James, and Richard became proud of his progress. James' fifth-hour teacher reported the exchange and assumed it was drugs. Unknown, but questions that I have. Where and who is the principal of the school? How will the boys react with each other when James returns? Did Richard end up doing the paperwork and send David to the DAEP? Who was the child James planned to beat up after school, and should that student be questioned? Will James continue to pursue this student? The place. We're at Rocket Junior High. It's about 900 students. Richard talks about the south side of town, and James is from there. There is a courtyard. Bus 50 is the students from south side of town. Teacher sees David and James in the hall together. There's no mention of demographics, just south side. So is David from the south side? Is the school in the south side? They don't really make that very clear. Do all students pass in the hall at the same time? If concerned with bullying, maybe look into separate grade levels while in the halls. The next is program. School is a junior high. We know that James is 15 and David is 13, so that can be kind of the age range, most likely. It's 13 to 15 or even maybe 12 to 15. There's an honor program. They mentioned David was in an honor program. The disciplinary alternative education program is available in the district. The school officer is on site. Then some things that are unknown that I was kind of thinking. Private or public is not specifically mentioned, but it is inferred to be public since board policies. What is the age range at the school? Again, I kind of talked about that. Are there policies on not treating students the same in disciplinary actions when a clear policy law has been broken? What are the percentages of students being sent to the DAEP, demographics, and the amount? Is the officer part of the city police or the district? Now, Section 5, review and prioritize the information. So here's some questions. Damaging to stakeholders and community. Depends on what is done with Richard Inman. David's mom could respond negatively to the community. If she's not happy with how things are handled, she could definitely be a voice of negativity about the district. Who has important stake in outcome? Richard Emmett and his supervisors. Have relevant stakeholders been consulted? Again, where is the principal, the superintendent? I don't know. There's so many more people that I think need to be involved. Do I feel like I know enough? Absolutely not. I think this case study, there needs to be a lot more information involved. Can I learn more? Yeah. Was there camera footage? Past similar situations? Things like that. For section 6 and 7, I decided to kind of combine them and put it into like a flow chart, like we did in class in the past. So this one is no further action is taken. So this would be my idea of pros and cons for that situation. For pros, David would continue at school and not have to go to the DAEP. Richard would feel he is advocating ethical decisions. The cons and the consequences, I think, Richard Inman would most likely lose his job because we don't really know what that official reprimand looks like. So the option 2 for this case study would be the forms are filled out on David. And what does that look like? Let's jump down to these consequences. Richard could still be written up for originally not filling out David's forms. And David would go to the DAEP. Now, are both students' well-being looked at? Are both students' well-being being looked at? And then if he eventually filled out the forms, would he still be written up? Those are all questions. The third, this is kind of the one that I kind of made up, that how I would have liked it to be handled. First of all, I would not have been so quick to call in the officer. I think the principal, superintendent, those sort of people needed to get involved, just to really clarify if it was a legal matter or if it was just an ethical matter that needed to be taken care of within the school. And that is what this diagram summarizes. So, of course, we're looking at all these options, and I would choose that third option because I feel like option 1 is very legal, option 2 is very ethical, and it's, there needs to be some sort of balance. These are kind of just summary of my reasoning. Would ensure all stakeholders are communicated with. Both students would have the opportunity to learn and improve their future. Their futures would not be hindered. David would not have to be introduced to an atmosphere that would most likely hinder his future. Implementing the plan. These are some different things that I would look at before I decided exactly how I would implement the plan. The school's ability to be consistent with policies could come into question if another similar incident occurs, is handled differently. Can things be handled without the law? Kind of talked about that earlier. And then what if? I would still make sure all stakeholders are communicated with properly. If I would be willing to lose my job if it means my ethical values stay in check. So this is kind of the path that I would take. Of course, it's very dependent on the specific laws and policies of the school. But communication is key. That is the first major part of everything, I feel like. You got to look at the student handbook. You got to look at the policies. You got to talk to HR to represent yourself as the assistant principal. And then I want to end with the note that this is going to affect people's future. Most importantly, the students. So I would want to see some sort of character building put into place by the social worker and counselors. Thank you.